very often provides information. It has a lot of reporting on the status of air travel and the FAA response, most of which I think we've reported here, but if you want to get it locked into your mind, you can go to abcnews.com. And then there is a lot of reporting, as there always is at abcnews.com, about the ramifications of this to individuals, to communities, and to the country as a whole. Tony Cordesman is in Washington at the moment. And Tony, since I talked to you last, I'm not sure how...
We break into Peter Jennings right now as you're looking at a live picture of the Pentagon, which is still burning. And we want to bring you up to date on the local situation here in Washington after this terrorist attack hits our nation's capital. Good afternoon. I'm Kathleen Matthews.
And I'm Maureen Bunyan. And here's what we have, the latest that we have for you. Just a few minutes ago, Mayor Anthony Williams of the district declared that the district is in a state of emergency. He said he did this in order to prepare the city for any possible future terrorist attacks. Let's go to his press conference to hear what he had to say.
We're declaring a state of emergency in order to put everyone on alert, in order to ensure that we have the highest level of preparedness. Obviously, if something were to happen, God forbid, and we pray that it won't, we will be fully prepared to then execute the necessary contingency plans.
Mayor Williams declaring a state of emergency in the city. Also, he told us that 100 police and National Guardsmen have been dispatched for traffic control at major intersections throughout the city. And he said people should stay out of our city. If you don't have to come into Washington, D.C. today, it is not the day to do so.
Now, this attack on the Pentagon obviously comes in a sequence of horrible terrorist attacks. And we want to bring you up to date on the planes that are believed to be involved in both the attacks on the Twin Towers up in New York City and here in Washington at the Pentagon. First of all, the FBI is apparently confirming that it was an American Airlines Flight 77, a Boeing 7057, en route from Dulles here in the Washington area to Los Angeles. That is the plane that crashed into the Pentagon. However, American Airlines is not confirming the location of where American Airlines Flight 77 is. In addition, we have United Airlines. That's United Airlines Flight 93 and United Airlines Flight 175. 175 was a Boeing 767. That flight was bound from Boston to Los Angeles, carrying 56 passengers, 2 pilots and 7 flight attendants. We cannot tell you from the airlines where that plane has crashed. And there you see Flight 93, United Airlines. That is the plane that crashed southeast of Pittsburgh. It was en route from Newark, New Jersey to San Francisco. And finally, that other flight, American Airlines Flight 11, you see there, that was a Boeing 767, and that is the plane that was en route from Boston to Los Angeles. Now, American and United are not confirming where these particular planes crashed.
And Kathleen, let's look at what the traffic situation is like around the district at this moment. At this moment, all bridges into the district are closed. You cannot come into the city on one of those bridges, Memorial Bridge, Wilson Bridge, Chain Bridge, of course. All roads are open, however, for people who are trying to leave the city to go home. And D.C. government workers have been sent home. All workers in federal buildings have been sent home, so there is traffic on the streets. Union Station is open, but there are no trains operating between Washington and New York City.
Now, especially since one of those flights did originate here at Dulles Airport, we want to give you a telephone number if you have concerns about knowing somebody who might have been on board that flight or any of the other ones that we just showed you. For passenger information, this is the number you can call. It's 1-800-245-0999. 1-800-245-0999. Call that number only if you believe that you do know somebody who was on board and you need to get that information.
And we'll have more on this very tragic situation for you as the afternoon continues. We now rejoin ABC and Peter Jennings.
You make very good points, and you therefore assume that there is a lot of money involved in an operation like this.
I think that's a dangerous assumption, Peter.
Okay.
We always use these phrases, $100 million or $10 million. What it requires is a lot of political commitment, ideological commitment. It isn't something 3 people can do. It is potentially something that perhaps 30 or 40 can do. It is possible that only one major cell of some terrorist organization is involved. But I think we also have to ask another question now, and that is whether some state that hosted this movement knew about it and assisted, because there are elements of sophistication which raise that prospect.
Stay with us for a second, Tony, because Vince Canestraro, who also talks on the subject of terrorism and does more than talk on the subject of terrorism for us, is also here at the moment. Vince, do you want to make some comments about this?
Yeah, Peter, I think that Tony makes some good points about the complexity and the sophistication of the operation. But I think also we have to see what kind of organizations in the past have been willing to do such a coordinated attack. And,
why is that a clue?
Because it's a pattern. We see people who committed suicide in these operations. So that points us away from a secular organization to a religiously oriented group. We've seen a pattern of planning against 5 U.S. airliners in 1993 with Ramzi Youssef when his safe site was inspected in Manila in '93. The FBI found evidence that he had been planning to hijack and blow up in flight 5 United airliners flying out of the Far East. Now, that was a very ambitious operation, and I don't think anyone believed that he could actually have done it. But here we are some 8 years later, and we see a coordinated operation and 3 planes hijacked and blown up against targets, obviously suicide operations, bringing a lot of other people with them. So that tends to point us towards a religiously organized group, perhaps towards Al-Qaeda, but again, with some state support. We've seen these groups evolve in their professionalism over the last several years. We go from...
Vince, can I just interrupt you for one second, just to try to keep you on the straight and narrow here? It may be a reach to blame. It may be a reach to blame a religious organization. I agree that we've come to accept the notion that some members, some people who worship Islam in the Middle East have found a better life giving themselves up, as we say. But aren't you sort of already directing and creating something of a mindset about an investigation that's more complicated than that?
Oh, certainly. And there's no question that this group, whatever it was, had some professional support, perhaps from a military and a state. The explosives, the way you would fly an aircraft. But it does point towards a group that has members who are willing to kill themselves in carrying out a punishing act against the United States. And there are only a few groups like that we know of. Secular radical Palestinian groups traditionally don't do this kind of thing.
Right.
We haven't seen that. The ones that we've seen that carried out suicide bombings tend to be Hamas, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, Al-Qaeda, and of course Hezbollah. And so you've got basically a handful of potential suspects. None of this proves anything, of course, but it does tend to focus an investigation.
Let me ask you both, you, Vince, and then Tony Cordesman second. Just on the basis of history and on the basis of your own individual expertise, what do you think the chances are of the United States finding out who did this? First of all, you, Vince.
I think that there's a fairly good chance of finding out who did this because the people who did this are going to brag, they're going to talk, they're going to try and claim credit in a way that doesn't bring attention directly to them. But they will talk to other people, and some of our intelligence resources will pick this up, and that will lead us in a certain direction. And then they will go back to the database of threat warnings that they've had in the recent past. The U.S. has had a worldwide terrorism alert for some time that was just renewed yesterday, but again, the focus of those threats was abroad, U.S. installations abroad. They'll go back and see whether or not some of their intelligence operations that were picking up these threats may have been the recipient of deception. In other words, the group that may have done this may have been broadcasting deceptive information that we thought was legitimate threat information against a foreign installation, while they were really planning to do this kind of an operation.
Thanks very much, Vince Canestraro. I'll go to Tony Cordesman right away, but I just want to remind people, if you watched the news yesterday, you noticed that you recall that we reported that a man named Ahmed Massoud, who was the last independent militia leader, not member of the Taliban in Afghanistan, was, we believe, killed. There's still some debate about whether he's dead or not, but certainly was attacked by his enemies, one of them disguised as a television cameraman. And the United States was very open to admit that what the United States lost when Massoud was killed yesterday was access into Afghanistan for U.S. intelligence operatives. And so I turn now to Tony Cordesman for a quick comment on how quickly, how easily, how complicated, how difficult, how impossible might it be to find out who did this.
Peter, let's consider several realities. We never found and punished the people who blew up the Marine Corps barracks.
In Beirut.
That's right. We have never really addressed who led the attack on Al-Khobar, and the people who've been punished were at the lowest possible level.
Those are the civilian and military barracks in Saudi Arabia.
That's right. And when we go back to Libya and what happened to Pan Am 103, one person has been imprisoned. We have never gone beyond attacking low-level people in an incident of this magnitude to attack the leaders and the core of the group with success. But we have never before really encountered things so serious that we are on the edge of war.
And in the case of Pan Am 103, the United States alternated between blaming Syria for supporting the operation and or Libya, which supported the operation. So you're really reaffirming how complicated this is.
More than that, Peter, I think the key element is that if any state is involved in this in any way, if it knew this was going to happen or it shoulders a movement once we identify it, we find ourselves with issues about war and peace, which we have never before encountered in terrorism.
Well, you certainly put your finger on one more part. I'd like you to hold that, Tony, for a second, because nothing could be more, in some respects, potentially dangerous at the moment. But let's not lose focus for today. We'll come back to Tony Cordesman and talk about American reaction to the rest of this world. But in the meantime, we have a disaster here in New York City, which is a national disaster, and we have a disaster in Washington because there's been an attack on the nation's military establishment. And we have at least one major plane crash in Pennsylvania today, which we believe is related, but in its own way is a national disaster, as the crash of a major airliner often is. And I want to go to, before we get carried away by theory on terrorism, no offense to my colleagues, let's go back to Lower Manhattan, where Bob Jameson is with George Stephanopoulos. And Bob has been visiting hospitals in the last little while, and so I think the two of you together can bring us up to date on the scene.
George, if I might, I'll start first because I've just returned from St. Vincent's Hospital, which, Peter, is a little more than a mile from the World Trade Center and is a principal destination today for those who were injured in this disaster. And as one measure of how large it is, by midday there were about 200 people, 18 of them critically injured, who were brought to St. Vincent's, which is about 20 more than were injured, than were brought to St. Vincent's after the World Trade Center bombing in 1993. The injuries that the doctors are reporting are not principally respiratory injuries, which was the case in 1993, but these are largely crushing injuries. And Peter, 5 hours after the first plane went into the World Trade Center, ambulances are still arriving regularly at St. Vincent's. They are conducting triage, classifying the degree of injury outside on the sidewalk in front of St. Vincent's, and they don't have a clear idea of how many more injured may go there, as well as the other hospitals in New York, and now we hear some in New Jersey.
And Peter, that's in part because we've just got a report from John McKenzie out in the field who talked to William Hull, the head of the Port Authority, who said that formal search and rescue operations haven't even begun yet. The bulk of the effort right now by the police and the fire department and others is simply to establish the integrity, the safety of the World Trade Center building. Second, what's left on the site of the World Trade Center. Secondly, Peter, they reported that there's a staggering number of firefighters still on the site, up to 200 that they can't account for yet. They were able to talk to one firefighter on the scene, though, who said that their biggest problem now is not having fire hydrants to put out these small pockets of fires that are cropping up all across the site. And secondly, Peter, there's a problem now with broken gas lines, which they fear could ignite further explosions.
George, could
Peter,
I just...
if I might add...
Yeah, go ahead, Bob.
I just add one thing. I was struck by something at St. Vincent's. The Red Cross, as you may know, has put out a plea for blood donors, particularly those with the less common types of blood, such as O. But even before that plea went out, thousands of people spontaneously showed up at St. Vincent's, thousands of people, and many of them told us, this is what we think we can do to help. We can't do anything else. Sitting at home watching on television won't help, but this might.
Well, Bob, you're quite right. And in fact, no reason you would have heard us, but we mentioned a short while ago that blood donors in Nebraska, one of their first instincts, or people in Nebraska, one of their first instincts was to go and respond to a request for blood donations because, as you've just pointed out and we've said before, there's a critical shortage of blood in the United States. And we've heard from the Red Cross any number of times in the last year or so that the country needs blood and it's not going to be available. And so it is reassuring to hear in New York City people doing that instinctively. Bob, let me ask you both, and start with you and then George. My sense of the recovery, if that's the word for it, of this phase of what's going on down there is to deal with people who are injured, who are clearly not in or under the World Trade Towers. Am I right?
Yes, I think that's correct, and a large number of them, in one way or another, are some of the emergency and rescue people. And then the next step, as we have seen in other disasters, will be to see who else there is.
And George, we've seen buildings collapsed. It sometimes takes days to discover people under collapsed buildings, and we now have a circumstance. Do we have any idea how many people got out before the building collapsed? We don't, do we?
Not a very good idea, Peter. We do know that there was some warning. As I said earlier, we spoke to some of the security guards who were on the site, and they did have some warning. There was a feeling that the second building was going to collapse, so the evacuation did begin from people as high up as in the 82nd and 86th floors, but we don't know how many were able to get out. And we do know, Peter, from at least one of the security guards, that they were nowhere near complete. They hadn't come even close to completing the evacuation, but we don't have numbers.
And Peter, adding a little bit to the confusion, the collapse of the North Tower may have affected other buildings around there, as well as the collapse of the Millennium Hotel.
Well, thank you both very much, and both of you come back at any time that you want and can or contribute to this. We can tell you that the military. Thank you both very much, Bob Jameson and George Stephanopoulos.
Thank you.
We can tell you that the military. The governor said earlier, the governor of New York, that the National Guard was going to come in, and there's National Guard on station in some parts of the city anyway, is setting up a temporary morgue on the piers in New York City near West 57th Street, which is where people often take off to go and have a tour of New York City from the air, and close by where the famous Circle Line leaves, so people can take a tour around the island of Manhattan and see what it looks like. And none of that traffic is permitted today. The only traffic we have seen on the Hudson River has been, as has been pointed out to us several times, John Miller particularly, pointing out that ferries are taking wounded across the river, across the Hudson River to New Jersey. ABC's Cynthia McFadden is on the phone at the moment. She is calling us from Bellevue Hospital, which is over on the east side of Manhattan, quite some distance from this. Sylvia, do you hear me? Cynthia, do you hear me?
I do, Peter.
Can you tell us what's going on there?
Yeah, we've been able to get into the Disaster Command Center, which is located here at Bellevue. As you say, it's about 20 or 30 blocks north and east of the actual site of the Twin Towers. But this is where the city puts its resources to prepare for an emergency. They rehearse here, practice here for disasters, and today we were allowed in the first group of journalists to go inside and see where they were running the disaster relief from. Let me paint a picture for you, if I might, of the room. It's about a 30 by 15 room, about 10 people crowded around a conference table, about 15 phone lines coming into the room. The mayor's office, emergency services, police and fire, all of those efforts being coordinated through this room. It was surprisingly calm, surprisingly quiet. It is located in the heart of the emergency room here at Bellevue Hospital, Peter, and the emergency room itself is busy. They've had about 140 to 150 people come through Bellevue so far. We've also had the opportunity to talk to the director of the hospital here and to the man who heads up the emergency room. I can tell you a little bit about the injuries if you'd like.
Please do.
Because this is a hospital further away, they're getting the less seriously injured, although, having said that, of the 140 or 50 people, 40 of them are classified in serious condition. 2 were dead on arrival. They have 1 baby who is being treated. 3 to 5 operating rooms are currently going with what the doctor characterized as extremely serious surgeries. The doctor running the operation here said that they have sent a team of physicians closer to the site, and they're going to be setting up tent hospitals closer to the site to help some of the enormous flow of injuries. Nobody made it here to this hospital until about 2 hours after the blast. And they believe, I've been listening to the coverage, they believe that it's not going to be for another many more hours until they feel the full brunt of this over here.
Okay. Thank you, Cynthia, very much. Come back to us, please. When you get even better handle of this. We've talked a little bit about the blood shortage, which, as I said, is a national issue. But in New York City, there are supplies of blood so far. People did respond very quickly and lined up ready to give blood at some of the blood centers here. There is a supply of O-type blood. O negative appears, as best we can understand from the people who are collecting it, is the most important kind of blood needed at the moment because it's the universal donor, meaning anyone can actually get it. Now, there's a slight bit more of information, like all information today, reasonably suspect at the outset, but the Associated Press is reporting that this airliner, this United Airlines jet, which crashed in Pennsylvania, which is a American Airlines, my apologies, United Airlines Flight 93. I don't quite know exactly what aircraft it was, a 767, I think, which we assessed uncertain about, did not know why it had crashed, whether it was part of this overall operation this morning. The AP is now quoting a man who minutes earlier, saying he was a passenger on the plane, told an emergency dispatcher in a cell phone call that we are being hijacked. We are being hijacked. Treat that, as you do all the information we give you today, as being preliminary at best, sometimes wrong. I think we've been pretty good about it today, and certainly confused, because listening to the mayor, listening to the governor of the state, both of whom we talked to, listening to the senator in charge of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, listening to all of our analysts, listening to everybody, the country is still very much in the middle of, if not immediate post-event chaos, certainly in terms of trauma, and trying to get a handle on what the hell's been going on here. And as we've said before, when you look at the television pictures of the Trade Center collapsed upon itself, these are buildings 110 stories high, and where thousands and thousands and thousands of people work. And I know on occasion we can run the images of it to the point of offensiveness. I hope we're not there. But this is what it looked like when one of the trade towers just appeared to either peel away or collapse on itself, but from top to bottom, 110 stories to the bottom. First one, the southern tower, Tower 1 or Tower 2, it doesn't matter what, just one tower and then the other, and then the other tower sometime later, which John Miller said the cops picked up very quickly, was looking weak and bending or leaning in one particular direction, indicating that when those two aircraft, one hitting one tower, the other hitting another, had gone straight into those towers with such force that even at the midpoint of the building, or in that case 2/3 up, something had happened to so totally weaken the infrastructure that this was like peeling a banana, except that it was full of people, or had many, many people in it. I think we have Senator John McCain on the phone from Washington. Am I right, Senator?
Yes, Peter, how are you?
I'm well, sir, thank you. I'm not well. None of us are well. You know that.
Yes.
What's on your mind?
Well, I think that this act obviously is one which would constitute an act of war. I believe that the American people should remain calm and rally behind our president, and I'm confident that our military and our president will find out the perpetrators of this outrage, and we will not only punish those responsible, but ensure that something like this never happens again. And clearly we need to look at our intelligence capabilities.
I don't mean for 1 second, Senator, to belittle the necessary thing you must say today, which is we'll find those who are responsible and we'll punish them, because Tony Cordesman has just pointed out very effectively how often we don't find the people and we don't get to punish them. But you say an act of war.
Yes.
Do you believe that if another country is somehow the patron of an individual or a group of individuals who has done this, we should go to war with that country?
Absolutely, because they have committed atrocity on a scale that's unprecedented in history that I know of. Everybody's talking about a second Pearl Harbor. At least that was an attack on military targets, not on the civilian community. This is an unspeakable outrage, and clearly we can and must find out who perpetrated it. And Tony Cordesman and I have great respect for him, but I believe that we have the capability to find it out, and we need to improve our intelligence capabilities, particularly in the area of human intelligence. We have wonderful satellite capabilities and technical capabilities. In the late 70s and early 80s, we, for all intents and purposes, dismantled our human intelligence capability, which divines motives, and that's something technical intelligence cannot do.
Well, I think those of us who cover intelligence in any way, Senator, know that human intelligence, or HUMINT as they call it in the trade, has been very difficult, particularly in places like Afghanistan. So just assume for a second, well, no, don't assume anything, but are you desperately frustrated at the moment in some respects because this was sort of, in many ways, this was bound to happen in some measure, and we may not be able to get at the perpetrators?
No, I think that among many other things, obviously sorrow is the overriding emotion, but also I don't think our lives will ever be the same again in some respect, especially those who use airliners with some frequency. There's always been questions and studies and tests of our airport security systems, and they've always found breaches in them. Obviously, that's going to have to be addressed, and that's going to be very inconvenient for Americans. But at the same time, we also have to reevaluate the importance of making sure that anyone who wants to try it is incapable of doing so. But the best way to address it, obviously, is going to the source.
Your Democratic colleague, Senator Biden, said a while ago, the terrorist wins again when it alters American lifestyle. I assume you believe the same thing?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And the things that have been inflicted on the American people is, I mean, it staggers the imagination. And yet I believe that the best thing that we can do as Americans is remain calm, rally behind the President of the United States, and know with confidence that we will take whatever steps are necessary to prevent this from happening again. I don't think that there's any reason for Americans to feel a sense of panic.
Okay. Thank you, Senator McCain, very much indeed. Appreciate your time. Senator John McCain of Arizona, who knows a lot about violence, and many people in the country will think knows a lot about leadership as well. Former presidential candidate, often talking about doing it, or often considered to be doing it again. Claire Shipman is in Washington. Claire, where's Mr. Bush?
Well, Peter, we have a little bit of news on that front. As you know, he is in the air again on his way somewhere from Shreveport, Louisiana. We have been told by sources that he will not be coming to Washington. He is going to make another stop at an undisclosed secure location so that he can talk to people from there on the ground. His security team can assess just how safe it is back here in Washington. As you mentioned earlier, that there must be great political pressure for him to get back to Washington. These sources confirm just that. The political team wants him back home. He wants to come back home. His security team does not feel it is safe right now. They do think, though, and they're guessing right now, that he might be able to get back at some point this evening. But again, he's got at least one more stop. Another interesting point along those lines.
Hold on, one more stop?
One more stop between Shreveport and Washington. He's on his way now, we're told, to another undisclosed location that his security team considers secure. They won't tell us where it is, obviously.
But do we know? So, in other words, this one more stop is another security stop dictated by the Secret Service?
Indeed it is. And we would be guessing if we talked about another Air Force base or something of the kind, but they have a number of stops. And I'm told this one is not anywhere in the direction of Washington, that they have a number of places they can take him.
Let me ask you this. Have you heard any mention whatsoever of the possibility the President will come to New York?
No, there was a rumor to that effect earlier, Peter, but that was shot down, and my sources tell me he is not going anywhere near New York right now. That situation would create chaos that New York just doesn't need at this point.
Absolutely.
They've also told us that Their full security plan is in effect. They do have the House and Senate leadership out of town. Condoleezza Rice is the only senior official remaining at the White House, and she will remain at the White House to try to coordinate efforts from there. Mrs. Bush has also been spirited away. She was on Capitol Hill this morning set to address Congress. She's been taken to an undisclosed location. Peter.
Now, there was some mention that there was some mention of the fact that the United Airlines aircraft that crashed east to southeast of Pittsburgh may have been, in fact, going in the direction of Camp David. Had you heard that?
I heard that, as you did. My security sources don't know anything about that, so we haven't been able to confirm anything along those lines.
Then we'll leave it alone. Claire, thanks very much. We'll come back to you as soon as we know where the president is going to go next. Seems a little bit strange. Pierre Thomas, work on the phones on the FBI. What have you got, Pierre?
Well, one of the first things that they are focused on, obviously, is the injured, but the next priority is to get to Dulles International Airport, which they are, and Boston Logan. They are going to talk to the Boston United and American airline officials. They're trying to get a sense of who was on the plane. Early on, they're very limited in what they can do. They're trying to assess the situation, but one of the first things they can try to do is try to get a sense of who was on the plane, try to begin to check out aliases, and that might lead them in some investigative direction. But they're very limited in the early stages in terms of what they can do.
Hello, I'm Del Walters in the ABC 7 studios. We're going to rejoin ABC in just a second, but we wanted to bring you up to date on the second prong and what has been now a two-pronged terrorist attack here, and that being the plane that crashed into the Pentagon. You were looking live at a picture there where at this hour the flames still continue to burn.
Joining Dale, I'm Kathleen Matthews, and we want to take you back several hours to about 10 o'clock this morning when a plane crashed into the Pentagon. And as you can see, damage and destruction there caused by that plane. While we are not getting confirmation from American Airlines as to what plane that was, apparently FBI sources have been telling ABC News that the plane that crashed into the Pentagon was American Airlines Flight 77. That was a Boeing 757 that actually took off from Dulles Airport and was en route to Los Angeles. Now, we understand that plane, the airlines are confirming that that plane was carrying 58 passengers, 4 flight attendants, and 2 pilots. Now, again, the airlines will not confirm where that airplane has crashed, but FBI sources have told ABC News that American Airlines flight is the one that crashed into the Pentagon.
We're going to update you on the injuries in a second, but first we want to bring you up to date on a phone number that we've been given by the Pentagon. If you are a Pentagon employee who evacuated the building, they want to hear from you. They're trying to get an accounting as to who may or may not be inside the building. The number that you can call is there on your screen. It is 1-877-663-6772. Again, that is the number for Pentagon employees, Pentagon personnel who may have evacuated the building this morning so that they can get an idea as just to how many people inside the Pentagon at this hour they still are searching for.
It's been 4.5 hours since that plane crashed into the Pentagon, and the injury list is climbing. Here's the very latest. Virginia Hospital Center is reporting that they have received 30 injured people. Washington Hospital Center is reporting they have received 5 critical patients. A lot of these are burn victims. And George Washington Hospital is confirming that they have 2 from the Pentagon attack who are in their emergency room. Now, we understand that there are at least 75 people who've been injured who are still on the ground at the Pentagon, and because they cannot bring aircraft into that area to medevac them out, they're unable to fly them to local hospitals, and so they're setting up a triage unit there at the Pentagon to be able to treat those patients.
And now on to the situation in the district. A little more than an hour ago at about 1:30 Eastern Time, D.C. Mayor Anthony Williams declared a state of emergency in the district. He said that if you don't have business in the city, please don't come. Emergency personnel are overwhelmed. Here's a little bit of what he said.
We're declaring a state of emergency in order to put everyone on alert, in order to ensure that we have the highest level of preparedness. Obviously, if something were to happen, God forbid, and we pray that it won't, we will be fully prepared to then execute the necessary contingency plans.
And to that extent, the mayor also promised that there will be live news conferences that will take place at 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, and 5 o'clock. We will let you know the details of those news conferences.
Well, emergency personnel have been dispatched to try to take control of the traffic situation, which has been mayhem in downtown Washington. As a result, a lot of buildings closing. And this is the latest situation out in Virginia. Route 50, 66, 29, and GW Parkway are now closed inbound. So any of those inbound routes are now closed. Medical personnel only allowed on those routes on the inbound roads. Medical personnel only allowed also on Canal Road, which is now one-way outbound. Rock Creek Parkway, all lanes northbound. In other words, they've reverted to a rush hour situation where all of the roads are now outbound to take people out of the city to try to bring control to that chaos downtown.
Again, we are 4.5 hours into what has been a two-pronged terrorist attack, one taking place in New York, the other here in Washington. ABC is working with us. We are working with them to try and get you as much information as we possibly can. We're going to go back now to ABC's live coverage of the events that are unfolding.
For the national tragedy that has occurred today, all Major League Baseball games for today have been canceled. The PGA Tour has canceled the beginning of tournaments on Thursday, and whether they will be further delayed is uncertain. Major League Soccer postponed all of the games it had scheduled for tomorrow night, and the National Football League says it is mulling over whether to postpone this weekend's schedule. Obviously, the effects of this are going to reverberate for many days, many weeks, many months.
Yep.
And so there are those kinds of cancellations being discussed.
Okay, thanks, Charlie.
Go ahead.
Thanks. I just, as we want to go to try to bring it back together for people who, a lot of people have been not with us all day. The thousands and millions of people may have been glued to their televisions, impossible not to. But ABC's John Donovan has been following the events of the last few hours, and he has managed to put together, I suppose we could call it a chronology or a timeline, if you will. But here is some sense of what happened from the beginning.
We want to tell you what we know as we know it, but we just got a report in that there's been some sort of explosion at
the first thing any television camera saw this morning was this. Just before 9 o'clock, roughly 15 minutes earlier, an American Airlines jet hijacked from Boston had crashed into the South Tower of the World Trade Center. There were 92 people on board.
It does not appear that there's any kind of an effort up there yet. Now remember, oh my God.
Oh my God.
That looks like a second plane.
I did not see a plane go in.
Minutes later, the second plane, the second tower. The fireball ate up the aircraft. It was a United Airlines flight, a 767 from Boston to Los Angeles. There had been 65 people on board.
Some sort of a concerted.
I was happened to look on the first tower, and I actually saw people waving where the first plane crashed through, and then it was unbelievable seeing this second jet come crashing into the second tower. What is going on?
New York City was staggered.
As soon as he got hit, I was thrown to a window. So I was very lucky.
We're going to interrupt this. We'll come back to this, I promise you, to go to a news conference being held by the Mayor of New York, Rudolph Giuliani.
And then, Governor, thank you very much for your assistance and your help and your support. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor, for your leadership through this crisis. This is a vicious attack upon New York. It's an attack upon America. It's an attack upon the whole concept of freedom and our way of life. And we cannot let these attacks succeed. The first step has to be to make sure we do everything in our power to protect the people and to save the lives of those whose lives are still at risk and to help those who have been injured. And I want to commend the mayor, and I want to thank my colleagues from Connecticut, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and the federal government have all offered and made ready support to help us deal with this ongoing crisis. The people of New York are not only the freest and most diverse people in the world, we're also, I believe, the most capable of rising to meet the challenges of this type of attack. And right now, we want New Yorkers to remain calm, to go about their business, to appreciate the fact that everything to provide for their safety is being done, to appreciate that everything that can be done to provide for the health and the needs of the people who are still at risk is being done, and that we will continue to work to make sure that we get through this as strongly and quickly as possible. I want to thank the federal administration. Secretary Thompson has been on the phone with me a number of times, as well as the president, for what they are offering and prepared to do. And we're just confident that, well, this is a horrible attack and one that is despicable and really unthinkable in its magnitude. We will get through this, and we will continue to have a great and free country, state, and society.
Do we know the number of casualties at this point, sir?
I don't think we really want to speculate about that. The number of casualties will be more than any of us can bear ultimately. And I don't think we want to speculate on the number of casualties. The effort now has to be to save as many people as possible. And I don't think we will know the answer to that until sometime tomorrow or the next day.
Were there large numbers of firefighters?
There are a large number of firefighters and police officers who are in harm's way. And we don't know how many we've lost. But there's no doubt we've lost some firefighters and police officers.
Do you know anything about the cause of the explosions that brought the two buildings down yet? Was it caused by the planes or by something else?
We believe that it was caused by the after effects of the planes hitting the buildings. We don't know of an additional explosion after that.
Could you tell us, do you expect any further attacks on New York? Is there anything to indicate that there could be more bombs, more planes out there? I know originally there was a report that 8 planes had been hijacked, 4 have only been accounted for. What about the remaining 4? And is there any possibility that there could be bombs on the ground planted by some?
We have no specific information to that effect. Obviously, the city is now closed. The airspace around the city is closed. And we are on heightened alert. But we have no specific information suggesting any further attack.
Can you tell us where the planes came from?
Major warships coming into the port of New York.
I think to give the people of New York confidence, to show that the federal government is standing with us, and to just to make certain that nothing further happens. This has been a very, very difficult and traumatic day for the people of the United States and the people of the city. And I think that it's an act that shows that the federal government is going to do everything they can to support us and help us.
Can you give us an idea of the extent of the rescue effort that's going on right now in Lower Manhattan? What the scope of this operation?
There are over 1,000 rescue workers, probably about 2,000 that are deployed, trying to get into the buildings, trying to find people, trying to search for people. The governor and I spoke a couple of hours ago. The governor has deployed the National Guard to relieve them because our people are going to need reinforcements pretty soon. But right now they don't want to leave because they're searching for innocent citizens, and they're searching for some of their brothers and sisters.
Are you finding survivors?
Yes, we have some numbers that we can give you. We have 1,500 people at Liberty State Park who were evacuated, described as walking wounded. They were evacuated by ferry and other means. There are about 600 as of about 15 minutes ago in local hospitals that we account for, 600 people that are being treated in local hospitals. And there are 150 in particular that were critical, that were moved by EMS. New York City has 170 hospitals. So we have a lot of hospitals, and we're utilizing all of them. Probably the one that was the hardest hit was St. Vincent's Hospital. And I would like to just single them out and commend them, because as I was rushing down there, after the first plane hit, and before the second, they were already deploying people on the street. I could see the doctors and nurses outside getting ready to receive people. And that was before the second plane actually hit the World Trade Center.
What was your experience down there?
Also blood donations. We have several sites for blood donations. 153 East 53rd Street, 66th and Amsterdam, which is the Red Cross, and 310 East 67th Street. If people want to do something and they can donate blood, that's going to help not just today, but tomorrow and the next day. This relief effort is going to take some time.
Mr. Mayor, you were one of the first people down there. Can you describe the scene in your own words, what you saw down there?
I don't know that I'm really able to describe it. It was the most horrific scene I've ever seen in my whole life. We saw the World Trade Center in flames, a big gaping hole all the way on the top of it. We could see people jumping from the top of the building. And then we went into Barclay Street, 75 Barclay Street, I think it was, and we were there when the building collapsed, and it collapsed in part on 75 Barclay Street. So we were trapped in the building for maybe 10 or 15 minutes, trying to get out different exits. And we finally went through a basement and came out 100 Park Place.
Did you ever fear for your own safety, sir?
Sure, yeah.
What went through your mind?
I don't think anything went through my mind other than making sure that we all remained calm and found an exit and just tried to figure out the most intelligent thing to do. Probably the same thing that went through the minds of 10,000 other New Yorkers who I could see on the streets, and I really have to commend them. If you really want to know what New Yorkers are all about, you just watch the way in which they handle themselves. They didn't panic. They moved deliberately. They moved swiftly. But they didn't hurt each other. They helped each other. I mean, these are just the most wonderful people in the world.
Do we know anything about the composition of that dust that blankets lower Manhattan? Is there any asbestos or any hazardous material in that dust?
I don't know. I don't know the answer to
Mr. Mayor, I got reports of a gas explosion related to this as well. Are you aware of that? There was a gas leak or possible...
We don't believe it. We don't believe that's the case.
Mr. Mayor, can you tell us anything about where the planes come from, where the aircraft came from?
Bill Diamond reminds me that we've turned off the gas in the city buildings, just to be certain.
Can you tell us
as a
anything
precaution?
about where these aircraft came from? There was a report they may have been hijacked in Boston.
I think we should leave. I think we should leave that up to the federal government to rule. Yes, we do have some information, but I think we should leave that up to the federal government to release that information. Our focus is on the relief efforts. And
Governor, what about security for the rest of the on the part of the United States for what happened here in this country, both in New York, Washington, and other places?
First step right now, Marcia, is to make sure we do everything to help those people who need our support, and whether they're injured or still trapped in buildings. The second thing is to make sure at the same time we're providing the maximum security against possible additional incidents. But clearly, this is an attack upon America. It's an attack upon our freedom and our way of life, and we must retaliate and go after those who perpetuated this heinous crime against the people of America.
Mayor, this is just compared to Pearl Harbor. Do you consider this to be an act of war? This has been compared.
I'll do both.
This has been compared to Pearl Harbor. Do you consider this to be an act of war?
This is a vicious, unprovoked, horrible attack on innocent men, women, and children. It's one of the most heinous acts, certainly in world history. And as the governor said, and I said to the president, we fully and completely support him in any action that he has to take in order to make an example out of the people who are responsible for this.
Is it an act of war in your mind?
I don't know that I want to use those words. I think the president is the one that has to respond, and I think what he has to know is that all of us in New York support him, and support him completely in the efforts that he's going to have to make over the next couple of days, week, and to make a point that people can't do this. You can't attack innocent men, women, and children. And ultimately, I'm totally confident that American democracy and the American rule of law will prevail. And the people of New York are going to help to demonstrate that over the next couple of days.
Anybody take responsibility for this? Any group take responsibility at this time? And what is the city doing to safeguard the citizens now that something like this has happened?
Well, first of all, I don't know of anyone that's taken responsibility for it at this time. And secondly, the New York City Police Department is fully deployed, not just in the rescue effort, but all throughout the city of New York, offering as much protection and as much security as we're capable of for the citizens of the city. And at this point, I believe that the people in New York City can demonstrate our resolve and our support for all of the people that were viciously attacked today by going about their lives and showing everyone that vicious, cowardly terrorists can't stop us from being a free country and a place that functions. And we'll do everything we can to make that point.
Jennifer Steinauer, please. Just a housekeeping. Can you please tell us what's going to happen to the New York primary?
This morning, I issued an order suspending the primary across the state. There will be no primary today, and we'll reschedule it once we get through this.
Jennifer,
Mayor,
please.
can you please walk us through the municipal services right now? What's going on with the subways and the schools, the courts?
The subway, the schools, the chancellor, I commend the chancellor. He was on the phone a number of times with us. He coordinated very, very carefully what would happen. He thought it out, and he came up with a very good plan, which was essentially to keep the schools open, to keep the children in school, so we didn't have a large number of children in the different boroughs that would be released from school. They're being released, I shouldn't say as normal, but basically on the normal schedule. If parents aren't there to pick up the young children, then the children will be taken to a center, and the parents will be notified to come and pick them up. The children who have Metro cards, who normally travel on the subway, will be able to do that. The subways are functioning in 4 of the 5 boroughs, and can we get an update, Joe, on how the subway is doing in Manhattan?
All the lettered lines are working.
And in Manhattan?
In Manhattan lines, all the lettered lines.
All the lettered lines are working, including in Manhattan. And throughout the rest of the city, public transportation is normal. So the children should be able to return from school in the normal fashion. And if any children don't have parents to pick them up, then we'll hold them, let the parents know, and then the parents can come and pick them up.
Mr. Mayor, you mentioned you were on Barclay Street. What's the radius of damage that's been affected? How many other side streets around the world?
I don't think we know yet. The whole area of Lower Manhattan has been very much affected by it.
How many police and fire are involved?
How many police and fire are involved? Like how many all NYPD off-duty officers that they come in? Or like
All NYPD and FDNY officers are on duty now, and we're going to need all of them. And again, thanks to the governor and the way in which the state reacted, we will have 1,600 National Guard to relieve them over a period of time, so we can get some relief for them.
If anybody's looking for someone that may have been in the World Trade Center or in and around that area, what should they do? How can they get information?
We're going to give you numbers so that we can try to help coordinate that. Individual businesses have already done that, but we will as soon as we can find some time from the relief efforts, give you a number in which people can call, and then we can direct them to the right place.
The National Guard loading or anything like that? Any lawlessness?
There have been no reports of lawlessness.
The governor of New York State, Governor George Pataki, the mayor, Mayor Giuliani, between him, the police commissioner just over on the right side of the picture there, the fire commissioner, the police commissioner more than anybody else being almost a restraining influence there, trying to say both to the governor and to the mayor, be careful what you say here. We don't have information on this, that, and the other thing. And on this question of casualties, it is the mayor who is attested to what everybody's got going, rushing around in their minds at the moment. More casualties, more than anyone can bear, but not willing to make perfect sense, not willing at this point to put a number on the people who they believe have been killed and or injured. The mayor did say that in one of the parks in the lower part of Manhattan, 1,500 people were regarded as walking wounded. They were aware of 600 people in local hospitals, and New York City has 170 hospitals, and as the mayor said, every one of them is available under these circumstances. And there were 150 critical conditions which were taken out, which were medevaced out or taken out under other circumstances, some of them going across the river to New Jersey. And in one case, according to the Canadian television network, saying had been airlifted as far away as Canada in order to get special medical care. Canada has a several very strong centers in burn treatment, so it may be one of the reasons that patients have gone up that far. The mayor returning again to this thing which has clearly moved him, I think, more than anything else today, getting down there and seeing the two trade towers before they collapsed on themselves, and seeing the fires burning up high, and he said it every time, and seeing the people jumping from the top of the trade towers, driven to their deaths by the encroaching fire in the rooms in which they no longer felt they were particularly safe. And Governor Pataki, I think the first person today to say in the clearest language there's got to be a retaliation. Lots of people said, you find out who has done this, you've got to be held accountable. Mayor being reluctant to say whether or not the country was in a state of war, which is a technical thing, I think, for him in many ways. But that's pretty much, I think, the summary of the highlights of their news conference, in which there seems to be a real coordination between the local and the state and the federal. And we have here with us a man who should know whether or not it's working, Jerry Hauer, who's the former head of New York City Mayor's Office of Emergency Management, and the last time I saw you was in that place on the west side of Manhattan, which you had designed for just an event, or maybe an event not just like this.
Yeah, this certainly is an incredible event, Peter. I don't think in our wildest imagination you could think about a day where simultaneous attacks, you know, we all think about it, we plan for it, but to have something like this occur is certainly, I view it as an attack on our nation.
But was it? I understand your emotional state. I'd like everybody's the same. I think we're all the same. Sure. Did you never consider that this was a possibility?
Well, we consider, and as we plan for New York City, we plan for massive events. In point of fact, one of the things that we did when I was still heading up OEM was we put in place memorandums of understanding with New Jersey, with Connecticut, Nassau, Suffolk County, to ensure that there was enough medical care available, that we had ambulances, police, firefighters, because we had to plan for horrific types of events. And as I told you when you were down, we planned for various types of incidents, chemical and biological types of attacks, for explosive types of attacks. You know, this is clearly just a devastating type of an incident here in the city.
The Office of Emergency Management office, that bunker, it's a pretty elegant bunker, and nor is it underground. It was second and third floors, right. I think. That's out of operation at the moment.
Yeah, my understanding is...
That's something you never planned for.
Yeah, well, in fact, we did. The alternate was to go to police headquarters or to another location in the event that the command center was inactivated for some reason or rendered useless.
Do you know what has happened to it today? Do you know precisely what's happened?
I talked to some folks down there, and my understanding is that a lot of the debris has fallen and has blocked the access to the building. I've heard some reports that they're concerned about the structural stability of the building, but I have not been able to confirm that. But as part of our plan, there were backups. You always have backups in your planning, and that's what the city is doing today.
Now, you've had to walk to get here today, and that's perfectly understandable. We're on the west side of Manhattan, and things are that difficult. But do you have a sense of how it's going? And we've heard the mayor's appraisal and accepted as an honest one. Do you have any sense of how the system's working, and do you have any sense of how many people are still trapped or dead?
Well, first of all, I think that things are working as they should. I think that, you know, when you've got the best police and fire department anywhere in the world, they are doing everything to try and rescue people, to try and get near the building. But you've got to also realize the dynamics in a situation like this change a bit when you have a number of police and firefighters injured as well, and that's what we saw this morning. I was listening to the fire radio this morning when the building collapsed, and they were screaming for help because firefighters were trapped. So the emotion changes a bit, but these are extremely professional people. These are very heroic people. They will do everything they can to try and get in and rescue anybody that could potentially be alive in that building, recognizing that there is a potential for additional collapse.
What about the prospect, as the governor's announced, of the National Guard being called into New York for an act of terrorism? Is this anything you ever envisioned, and what will they do?
Well, in fact, that's the question, John, what they'll do. I would imagine that they will help support the police department, the fire department, provide logistical support, manpower, help with search and rescue. Whether or not they'll be used for law enforcement purposes, traffic control, things like that, I think I've not been privy to those discussions, so I don't know. But that's certainly possible.
Leading up to the millennium, you personally designed a series of exercises where a disaster would unfold and they would respond to it, a tabletop exercise, a field exercise, and then another disaster, and then another, to make it more and more difficult to stretch the resources to the limit. Was that worst-case scenario design that you put together to see if the city could handle such a momentous disaster anything close to this, or have a component like this?
Yeah, you know, as we were planning for the millennium, we were planning for millions of people in Times Square and for the potential of something happening there. And we had to look at where all those resources would come from.
So did you have, in your design, did you have a truck bomb go off and then something else happen?
We had a sequence of events, both explosions, chemicals, biological incidents, and we looked at various types of terrorist events. And, you know, I think that what you're seeing here today is the result of having the New York City Fire Department, New York City Police Department well prepared. But again, I don't care where you are, anywhere in the country, anywhere in the world. An incident like this is difficult and certainly stresses any system anywhere in the world. And then when you have a number of injuries to police and firefighters, it really does change the dynamics.
Did you ever imagine in your various scenarios that a building, not to mention two separate buildings, basically, in case of the trade towers, would collapse on one another?
We did plan for building collapse, for bombings, and that was part of our routine planning.
Is there some hint there of what the operation now faces in terms of what you went through?
Well, what happens from here on out is a very slow process because first of all you've got to put the fire out, and my understanding is there's gas lines feeding the fire, and it is not out. So before you can really start doing a search and rescue in the middle of the building or even recovering those victims, you've got to get that fire out.
Yeah. The mayor did just say a moment ago the gas has been turned off in city buildings. That would seem to be to have